All right.
There you go.
Here you are.
Let me share my screen again. All right. So before we get started, a little bit about me. I'm Kathleen Miner. I'm chair of the Volunteer Coordinating Committee for the Whitfield County Democratic Committee. I was a volunteer leader for the Democratic Party of Georgia in 2020 and 2021, and I got my start on the 2008 campaign, hence, Yes We Can. Today, we're going to be talking about the 5 steps to bringing hope back to North Georgia, or turning North Georgia blue. And if you are not from Georgia, translate North Georgia to any rural area in the United States or any area in general, but we're going to be focusing on rural areas today. So 5 steps to bringing hope back to North Georgia. Our first step is we need a new mindset. Because when we look at these very conservative areas, we see this kind of pie chart, this overwhelmingly conservative chunk of the electorate. But this is not what rural areas actually look like. And Dade County is just an example in North Georgia. Most of the North Georgia counties and a lot of rural areas look like this, or some variation thereof. So we're going to look at the overlooked slice of this pie chart, and then we're going to rethink North Georgia voters, specifically infrequent voters, non-voters, and discontented Republicans. And anytime that you see North Georgia in this presentation, just insert whatever state you're from and that rural area. So this is what rural areas actually look like. In Dade County in 2020, as many people did not vote in that election as voted for Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is, of course, the winning U.S. House candidate. So who is in this did not vote category? We're going to look at the problems in each of these groups, because if we know what problem is keeping these people from voting, then we can work to fix it. So you've got infrequent voters who are going to be more of a problem this year than in 2020, because this is a midterm. You've got non-voters and anti-politics people who just don't vote, period. And then you've got discontented Republicans. So infrequent voters, classic problem of the Democratic Party. We have high voter turnout during presidential election cycles, but not during midterms and local elections. Why is that? And there are a couple of different reasons. First of all, a lot of people are less familiar with those midterm and local election candidates. When you're talking about the presidency, most people have heard of Joe Biden and Donald Trump, even if they don't fully understand their policies and who they are as candidates. You've heard those names. But when you get started talking about down ballot races, when you go down the ballot to Secretary of State, Public Service Commissioner, et cetera, fewer and fewer people know what those positions are, much less who the people are running in those races. And you're very unlikely to go out and vote for somebody that you've never heard of. Also, if everybody can mute their microphones real quick, thank you. And I'm going to pin my video real quick. So that's one problem. If you're less familiar, you're going to stay out of it. Another problem is a lot of people don't know elections happen every year, which can be shocking if you are as deeply ingrained in politics as a lot of us are, but a lot of people don't know about the midterm elections. I have people that I go up to and say, hey, are you voting in the election? And they're like, what are you talking about? The presidential election was 2 years ago. So some people just don't know that. And then you've got less regional and local publicity of races. When you think about the political resources that we use, we're watching CNN, MSNBC, listening to NPR, getting information from the Washington Post, the New York Times. All of those are national news organizations. That's where we're getting our information. And they're very unlikely to be talking about local races. So few people have access to that information unless you're watching your local news station, which fewer and fewer people are, or getting your local newspaper, which may or may not be printing anymore. You're very unlikely to get that local and regional information. And then last but not least, a lot of people forget. I always tell people I forgot a local election one time, almost forgot a midterm election. So anybody is subject to, getting busy and letting that slip by. And the great thing about all of these problems is they are very, very easy to fix because you and I have all of this information that people are missing. These infrequent voters are missing. And as soon as we reach out with that information, We drastically cut down on the infrequent voters. So this is a very easy problem to fix, and we're going to talk about the best method of fixing that a little bit later. Non-voters and anti-politics people are a little bit more difficult. And to understand this group, Stacey Abrams told us in 2020, she came to a Democratic Party of Georgia meeting, and she said, non-voters, undecided voters are not like you and me. They don't watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox. I doubt anybody here is watching Fox, but they don't watch the news. They don't get the New York Times and Washington Post updates on their phones. They don't have the internet. A lot of people in rural areas across America do not have internet access, much less social media. And when you take away all of that, how likely would you be to know that an election is happening or to know who the candidates are? And so these people lack that political information that you and I have. And they're usually busy keeping their families fed, and they do not have time to put focus into something that they see as just kind of two sides of the same coin. A lot of times these voting eligible people who are not voting, they stay out of politics because all they see, because they don't have that political background you and I have, they see Democrats fighting with Republicans and Republicans fighting with Democrats. And if that's all you're seeing and you don't have the background to understand it, there's no discernible difference between the political parties. And these people are very unwilling to get involved in that us versus them thing when they're busy keeping their families fed and busy keeping the lights on. So a lot of non-voters, anti-politics people, it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't have the background to understand the personal power of the vote on their daily life, because they don't have this political background that you and I have. They don't have those political resources to understand this stuff. And so a lot of times you'll hear from this group, well, politics just doesn't affect me, or I don't know who to believe. Those are things that are a little bit more difficult to address than the problems for infrequent voters, but we know how politics affects our daily life. We know who to believe, and we can share that information if we can understand how we translate that information to people who don't have the political background. We need to translate our political knowledge into kind of non-political knowledge, and we're going to talk about what that means and how to do that a little bit later in the presentation. But they're also fixable problems, and we can get a lot of non-voters and anti-political people out to the polls. So discontented Republicans is the largest group, especially for this area, and definitely the most interesting. So most of this did not vote group up here in North Georgia are discontented Republicans. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people out there who are just as angry, just as outraged with where the GOP is right now as you and I are. And while they are Republicans, they're unwilling to vote for the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Trump candidates of the GOP. So you see them not voting. They're not willing to vote for Marjorie Taylor Greene, but they're not switching to vote for the Democrat. And the reason that that happens is a lot of these Republicans, even if they're unhappy with these current GOP candidates, they're still consuming conservative news sources. And if you are consuming that political information, you are subject to the misinformation campaigns of the GOP. The main one is Democrats are terrible people. And if you don't like MTG, but you also think Democrats are terrible people, you're probably not going to vote for either of those candidates. You're just going to stay out of it. So that misinformation campaign is very, very difficult for you and for me to address. That is deeply ingrained in our society right now. But one thing that we can address is the fact that you and I are unintentionally feeding into these misinformation campaigns. That's something that we can stop doing. That's something that we can address. And when we do, we make a big difference, and we get a lot of these discontented Republicans to not only stop voting for that GOP candidate, but to switch their vote to the Democratic candidate. So those are our three problems for our three groups. And to fix all those problems, we start with step 2, a shift in our language. We're going to talk about politics versus policy. Those words seem synonymous, and I thought that they were synonymous for a long time. They're very different. We're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about shifting our goal for this midterm. And then we're going to talk about reframing the vote as an act. So politics versus policy. Politics is the Democrats versus Republicans, the flipping the Senate, the holding on to the House, that political language that you and I understand. But a lot of people around us do not. Policy-focused language is the everyday application of politics. So what that Democrat word stands for, what that Republican word stands for, the policies of the candidates. And we want to move our language away from politics into policy, because politics is a very exclusionary language and it alienates a lot of the people who don't speak it. And the way that I always explain this is when you think about doctors. My dad's a doctor and my brother's in medical school. And my brother was just home this afternoon and we were sitting at the dinner table and my dad and my brother start talking medicine. And they're using words with 12 syllables and textbook stuff. I have no idea what's going on. I know that they're speaking English, but my mom and I are sitting there just thinking, I don't know what's happening, because we don't have the medical background to understand what they're talking about. And so we just kind of zone out and we leave the room and we leave them to it. That same thing happens when you and I start talking politics, because a lot of the people in the room don't have the political background to understand what we're talking about. The people leave the room and they let us get on with our political talk. It's not a problem when we're talking about the doctors talking about medicine. The medical stuff needs to be left to the medical professionals, right? But when you and I are talking politics and somebody leaves the room for that, they often end up not voting and not taking part in our democracy. So politics as a language is something that we need to get away from as much as we can and focus on policy, which is the everyday application of politics. It's the layman terms of that political language. And the first step to getting away from politics and talking policy is to remove the words Democrat and Republican completely from our vocabulary. There's a couple of reasons why. I know that sounds weird. This is how we define politics, but those words are not helpful to us, because for non-voters who don't have the political background you and I have, the words Democrat and Republican mean the same thing. They don't see a difference between those terms, so it's not helpful to use those terms around non-voters. Republicans hate Democrats because that word has been vilified by the GOP. So those are not helpful terms to use with Republican voters who make up the majority of the voting population in these rural areas. And then if you're using these words with other Democrats who understand, you're preaching to the choir, and the choir in these areas is only 10, 15% of the population. So these words are not helpful to us and we need to get away from using them. And what you quickly realize is you don't need these words to talk about policy and politics. And then when we look at this midterm election, we need to change our goals. We're not here to elect Democrats, because that word's not helpful. We're here to elect leaders that care about people and will enact helpful policies. Those two things mean the same thing to us, but they sound very different to people that don't have the background to understand what a Democrat is. So we want to shift our language to this policy-focused language. Couple of examples of that. Let's go through this. Policy-centered language is not about the parties and the politicians. It is about their policies, the everyday application of politics. Because remember that Stacey Abrams slide. A lot of people that are not voting do not recognize the connection between the vote and their daily life, because we're not making that connection. We need to start making that. That's the number one thing that gets a lot of people out to the polls for the first time. So political language, when we're talking about, for instance, Marcus Flowers, who's running for the 14th District U.S. House seat in Georgia. Political language that we don't want to use would be, we got to get rid of MTG, Republicans are ruining the country. A couple of things that stand out to me here. If I'm a non-political person, if I don't have that political background, I'm going to ask, what is an MTG? What is a Republican? And then that Republicans are ruining the country, that's us versus them language. And one of the reasons that non-voters stay out of it is because they believe that politics is us versus them. It's two sides of the same coin. So we need to get away from that us versus them language and away from these political terms. A better way to phrase this would be, Marcus Flowers is running to bring high-speed internet to every county in our area. That's talking Marcus Flowers policy. That's talking about a person. We didn't mention that he's a Democrat, a person with a nice policy that positively affects the daily life of most of the people in this area. That sounds awesome. A lot of people up here do not have internet access, much less high speed. So this sounds great, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a non-voter, an independent, or a libertarian. And we didn't use the word Democrat. So this is policy-focused language that we want to shift our gears towards. Another example, what we don't want to say, we got to reelect Warnock so Democrats can hold on to the Senate. If I don't have that political background, I'm going to ask, what is a Democrat? What is a Senate? How does one hold on to whatever a Senate is? Is it a physical thing? This is very political language that you and I perfectly understand, but a lot of people don't. And so this doesn't make sense. A better way to phrase this would be, Raphael Warnock wants to make healthcare affordable and make sure rural areas actually have hospitals and doctors. Especially during the pandemic, a lot of the hospitals in rural Georgia shut down. A lot of counties in Georgia do not have a doctor in the county limits. And if you have a heart attack and the closest hospital is an hour away, what do? So this is language that makes sense to everybody in the room because it is how politics affects their daily life. It's making that connection between the vote and daily life. And this sounds great to everybody in the room, regardless of your political affiliation, because it is a person helping the people that they serve. We want to show that we care rather than saying it because that has a lot more impact. And if you're wondering where to find policy information and language to use with voters, if you type in whatever candidate you're talking about into Google, their candidate website will at the top have issues or policy, something, and they'll have a list of their policies and it'll have language that you can draw from. But we want to shift our gears from political language to policy-focused language. Then when we're talking about reframing the vote, this is about the voter, not what I want. We need to shift that focus. We're not here to elect Democrats. We want the vote to be about using personal power. Back in the 60s, when they were registering people to vote, they didn't knock on doors and say, hey, I need you to register to vote so that we can elect a political party. It was very much about giving people the personal power that the vote gives. When John Lewis talked about the vote, he said it's the most powerful nonviolent tool that we have. And he talked about the vote as a personal power that each person has of their own, of a personal power, basically. It's not about electing a party. Electing a party is an external motivator versus an internal one. When I'm calling up people phone banking and I say, hey, I need you to get out to the polls so that we can elect Democrats up and down the ballot. That person may very well go out to the polls, vote, and vote for every Democrat on the ballot, but they did it because I asked them to. And come the next election, they're probably going to need me to call them up and ask them to do that again. The motivation is coming from an external source, something from outside of them. If I'm telling somebody, hey, voting for Marcus Flowers can make sure that you have high-speed internet access at home, and they say, oh man, that's awesome. I don't have internet access right now. That's an internal motivator. They want to go out and vote. We want people to vote. We want them to want to vote. Because if you have that inside of you, knowing, hey, this affects my daily life, I want to go out and use this power, they're much more likely to not only vote this time, but in the local elections next year, in the presidential elections the next year. It becomes something that you do every time because you know it affects you personally. When we're talking about turning out voters, it's about using personal power to change your daily life. It's about protecting the right of everyone to be able to cast a ballot. The voter protection hotline for Georgia is written on this slide. The voter protection hotline for the national, I'm going to ask my mom, can you post the national voter hotline in the chat again? I think it's 888 our vote, but there is a national voter hotline that if anybody has any kind of voting problem, you can send that along to them. They can call that number. They can make sure that their vote is counted. They can make sure they know how to cast a provisional ballot if somebody says they can't vote that day. We want to protect the vote. We want to protect this personal power. And then we also want to push early voting in Georgia especially. We were talking a little bit about this before this presentation started, but in Georgia, it has been made harder to vote by absentee. There's a lot of little things that you have to get right. So we're pushing everybody to vote in person early. One, if you can cast that ballot in person, get it counted right there and then, there it is. But also, if you wait until election day, if something happens the day of, if something happens on election day, maybe there's crazy traffic on the road, maybe something happens to your cat and you got to take him to the vet all day long. You just don't know. You don't want to leave it until the last minute because there's no makeup test. Vote early, always vote early if it is available in your state. But reframe the vote. It is not about electing Democrats. It is about a personal power. It's about protecting that right. It's about early voting. Now, step 3 is changing our strategy. Typical DNC strategy is to turn out every single Democrat in an area. That's great if you're talking about a blue state or like Midtown Atlanta, but North Georgia does not have Midtown Atlanta. We have 2 little tiny blue dots in the entirety of North Georgia. If you turn out every single Democrat in this area, you're only going to have 20% of the vote, and you can't win an election that way. So we need to get away from this DNC strategy. To do that, we're going to look at a couple of different other strategies, specifically the Obama 2008 campaign strategy, which turned out a lot of first-time voters. And then we're going to talk about the 2020 Democratic Party of Georgia texting team strategy, which turned out a lot of Republicans for Democratic candidates. And then we're going to talk about friend-to-friend contact as a means of voter outreach. So the 2008 Obama campaign, this is where I got my start. My mom ran the Obama phone banks for the Whitfield County Democratic Committee headquarters in 2008. My brother and I were little homeschooled kids running around that headquarters, and I was training the new phone bankers that came in. So this campaign has a special place in my heart. And there were a couple of different kinds of voter outreach happening back then, a couple of different kinds of election work. You had canvassing and phone banking, which are classics of Democratic politics, but you also had something that not very many presidential candidates especially were using at this point in time, which was friend-to-friend contact. And this came in a couple of different ways. You had Obama house parties, where somebody would host, you would get a bunch of people over to your house. Maybe they were Democrats, maybe they weren't. You got a bunch of people in a room together, and they talked, maybe about politics, maybe about the election, maybe about their kids, maybe about something else. You got a bunch of people in a room together that didn't all necessarily agree with each other, and you built bridges. This was a big deal in 2008, and it was very powerful. You also had word of mouth and intentional conversations happening between friends and family about this cool senator from Illinois. Now, back in 2008, we did not recognize the power of friend-to-friend contact, but the cool thing about 2020 is we brought this back. We started doing friend-to-friend contact again, and we had the technology to get data from all of this friend-to-friend contact, and we were able to see the results, and it blew our minds. So when we start talking about voter outreach, you start talking about your contact rate. So if you're phone banking, about a third of the people that you call pick up the phone and start talking to you. That third is your contact rate. It's about 30%. With text banking, it's kind of weird. It's a lot lower. Text banking, our contact rate is about 3 to 5% on a good day, but the power comes in volume. So in the runoff election in Georgia, the Democratic Party of Georgia, just in the runoff, sent out 17.5 million texts. So high volume, but very, very low contact rate. With friend-to-friend contact, our contact rate jumped to 95%. That is mind-blowing. 30% is great. 30% is spectacular, which is why every single election we have phone banking and we're pushing that so hard. That number is great. To see 95%, we took a step back in 2020 and said, wow, and we put most of our resources into friend-to-friend contact during the 2021 runoffs because we saw that it worked so well. And there's a couple of reasons why it does. One, your friends usually text you back. When I'm phone banking, I am calling strangers. Some of them are going to pick up that phone, but some of them won't because they don't pick up a phone to a stranger. If I'm reaching out to my cousin, she's going to pick up the phone because she's my cousin. So that's one reason. And then two, we can tailor our messages. When I'm phone banking, the great thing about phone banking is you're reading from a script. It's incredibly easy to phone bank because I pick up the phone, punch in a number, I read that script to every single person that I'm talking to. That script is going to resonate with some people, but it's not going to resonate with others because everybody is different. Friend-to-friend contact. If I'm texting my cousin, I know who she is before I pick up the phone, so I can tailor that message to what my cousin cares about. I can talk to my cousin like I talk to my cousin in real life. I know the person on the other end of the line before I start talking, before we have that conversation. That's really powerful when you're talking about voter outreach, tailoring your messages. So with friend-to-friend contact, we found this is very low commitment, but very, very high impact. So to have an equivalency there for you, 5 minutes of friend-to-friend contact has the same impact as an hour and a half phone banking shift because of the contact rate. That's crazy. It also does not require technology. When you're talking about friend-to-friend contact, it can be me texting my cousin, but it can also be me going up to my friend at the gym on Saturday and talking to that person in person. So this doesn't require technology. It doesn't require internet access. So all those people in North Georgia and in rural areas across the country who don't have internet access, who may not have all of the technology necessary to do this work, they can do friend-to-friend contact. So this is very accessible to everyone. And the more election work you have happening, the more likely you are to make a difference in an election. So that's our first strategy. The second strategy is the Democratic Party of Georgia texting team strategy from 2020. This is where I was working in 2020 and 2021. And we had one basic rule: indiscriminate compassion, kindness, and grace, no matter who we're talking to, even really hateful Republicans. And the reason was this did a couple of things. When you are nice, even if somebody is cussing you out, you're diffusing political tension because it is very hard to be hateful to thank you for letting me know, have a nice day. You're getting away from, okay, let's walk into a room and have an argument, to, okay, we're going to be nice, we're going to be civil. It gets your foot in the door to have a conversation with a person rather than an argument. And also, every single one of our volunteers, when they were nice, became a PR campaign for our party, our candidates, our platform, and our policies. Because here's the thing, the main GOP strategy right now is to vilify Democrats. Either we can confirm that misinformation campaign, or we can undermine it every single time we open our mouths. And when we are nice, regardless of who we're talking to, we are undermining the GOP's misinformation campaign that we are terrible people. Because I am saying to that person who believes that Democrats are terrible, hey, I'm nice. That person questions that misinformation because I am challenging it. So indiscriminate compassion, kindness, and grace has a lot of pluses, and this was the main thing that we used and had a lot of success with it in 2020. The other thing that we did is we never opted out Republicans. And if you're not a texting person, opting out, there's a little button when you're text banking. You text a number, you've got your little screen. Up in the top corner, there's an opt out button. If I punch that button, all that means is we're never going to reach out to that number again. If somebody's threatening us, for instance, we can push opt out and we're never going to text them again and they can't text us. We never opted out Republicans for being Republicans, even though a lot of our volunteers wanted to, because Democratic policies benefit most Republican voters, especially rural voters. Republicans just don't know that. They can't possibly know that if we're not talking to them. So opting out is not something that we want to do. And in real life, this translates to defriending your Republican friends on Facebook and Instagram, cutting ties with your Republican friends and family. When we do that, they can't possibly know about the policies that we have. And also, this makes sure that Republicans are locked inside of an echo chamber, not only created by themselves, but we're helping to create that. So when you're watching Fox News, you're using Parler as a social media, if that still exists, you're listening to conservative talk radio. That creates an echo chamber of your beliefs. You're only getting one side of the story. But when I defriend my Republican friends on Facebook, that helps to strengthen that already existing echo chamber. I don't want to do that. So we never opted out Republicans. We don't want to defriend Republican friends. We don't want to cut our ties with Republican friends and family as much as we may want to. These were the two things that we did for the Democratic Party of Georgia. And it was very successful. We had a lot of Republicans that voted for Democratic candidates because we were reaching out to them and letting them know what those candidates stood for. You can't do that if you're not talking to these people. So taking all of that, taking those strategies, taking friend-to-friend contact, we're going to talk about mapping our networks and who we can reach out to with friend-to-friend contact and with these strategies. So we're going to look at who our people are, who are our networks, and then we're going to talk about how we tailor our messages to the different people in those networks. And that breaks down to a couple of different groups. You've got the hardcore voters, the infrequent voters, the non-voters, and those discontented Republicans. And then we're going to talk about picking your battles. So this is the part where everybody gets out a little scrap of paper, your phone, your favorite note-taking device. I've got a little notebook here, and we're going to go through an exercise to get you thinking about who your networks are. So let's look at our people. Think about all the different groups that you're a part of. Think of high school friends, college friends, family members, the people that you work with, the people down the street, your teammates, the people that you play pickleball with on the weekends, your old theater troupe, what have you. Think about the different groups that you're a part of. And then within those groups, think about 3 people that you could reach out to about this election. So when I'm thinking about this, I'm going to reach out to my cousin, my best friend from college, and my friend from Taekwondo. Those would be my 3 people. Now, when you look at your networks, when you look at all these groups that you're a part of, recognize that every single one of those groups, regardless of what title you've given it, every single one of those groups has a person with no plan to vote, has a person who has forgotten that there is a midterm election, has a discontented Republican who is willing to vote for a Democratic candidate if we reach out to them, has a non-voter who is willing to vote if we reach out to them, has an infrequent voter. All of those people, you are the most likely person to get that person out to the polls. That's the power of friend-to-friend contact. So think about your networks. And as we go through this 4th step, think about those 3 people that you are going to reach out to and think about them when we go through this next part. So who you reach out to, how you reach out to them depends on the person. Whether they're a hardcore voter, an infrequent voter, a non-voter, or a person who hates politics, or a Republican, your message is going to change a little bit. But no matter who you're talking to, remember that all voters want leaders who care and have helpful policies. So no matter who you're talking to, be kind, be helpful, and talk policy. And think about the Democratic Party of Georgia texting team strategy: compassion, kindness, and grace indiscriminately. So tailoring our messages. When we're talking to hardcore voters, these are people that you are 197% sure have already voted. You want to reach out to them anyway, because 1, anybody can forget that there is an election and you want to double check. And two, if that person comes back and says, well, I've already voted, that's when we can reach back out to them and say, okay, that's awesome. Now, can you reach out to 3 of your friends and remind them to vote? So in 2020, I reached out to my cousin. She said, Kathleen, I've already voted. And I said, that's great. Can you reach out to 3 of your friends? She said, yes, I'll do that. So what that did is I reached out to my 3 initial people. When my cousin reached out to her 3 people, I was inadvertently reaching 6 different people, and 3 of them were completely outside of my network. I don't have contact with those people, but I'm indirectly reaching them through my cousin. So what this does, I call it the pyramid scheme that actually works. Our networks web out very, very quickly, and we're able not only to reach the people that we have contact with, but the people outside of our networks. I've got this little web of people because this webs out so quickly. So hardcore voters always ask, and if they say yes, that's your opportunity to spread your web, spread your network. With infrequent voters and non-voters, a little bit more work goes into this, but you want to identify what policies and candidates might interest them the most. So with my friend from Taekwondo, hates politics. Took me 6 months to get this person to vote. Finally, only got him out to vote during the runoff election in 2021. So this person, he finally told me one day, Kathleen, politics just doesn't affect me. And I said, hold up, yes, it does. This guy hates politics. He also hates his utility bill. So I mentioned to him the Public Service Commissioner, down ballot race. But I said, listen, Daniel Blackman is running to lower utility prices and bring high-speed internet to every single county in Georgia. And this guy's eyes just lit up because he recognized, oh, wait, the vote has a connection to my daily life. I made that connection for him. The next day, he called me, and we're millennials. We don't call each other. So this was a big deal. He called me and said, Kathleen, I think I'm going to go vote. Who on the ballot is going to help me? That's what you want to think about when you're reaching out to these people. Which person on that ballot is going to help that person? What's going to incentivize them the most to get out and cast that ballot? How can you make that connection between the vote and the daily life? When you can do that, you get a lot of people out to the polls for the first time. You want to avoid political language. You want to be patient. You want to be helpful. When I was talking to my buddy from Taekwondo, not once did I use the word Democrat. Not once did I use the word Senate or hold on to the Senate or take the House. I just talked about that policy, and that made sense to this person. And then I had another person, she had never voted. And the reason that she had never voted was because she had never voted. She had never gone through that process, and there was a lot of anxiety for her to go out and vote for the first time. So what we want to be able to do is be the friend that all of our friends can ask us all the voting questions. And I offered this girl, you know, if you want to ask me anything, please do. And so she asked me, what do I do when I vote? And so I told her, well, you go to the courthouse, you walk in, you hand them your ID, they hand you a little card, stick it in the machine, push some buttons. And as soon as I gave her that information, that's what got her out to the polls for the first time. So we want to be able to remove as many barriers to the ballot box as we can, and to recognize that there are a lot of barriers that we don't necessarily think about, not just voter suppression, but these very simple things, just a lack of that voting knowledge. So be the person your friends can ask questions. Now with Republicans, this is the most difficult, but it is entirely possible to talk to Republicans, especially those discontented Republicans. So the first thing that you want to do is identify the common ground that you have, and I guarantee you it is there, and start there. A lot of times there's a mistake that we make when we're talking to Republicans, when we're talking to libertarians, etc., is we start with the thing that we disagree on. We open that conversation with abortion. We open that conversation with the Second Amendment. And when you get into that, you're not starting with a strong foundation. That is going to turn into an argument because you so fundamentally believe different things. With a lot of my Republican family, they're Republicans, but they're also teachers. And I guarantee you, when I start talking to those people and saying, you know what, teachers need to be paid more, that's something that we can agree on, even though we come from different political spectrums. And when we start on that common ground, that creates a strong foundation to build our conversation. So always look for that common ground and start there when you're talking to somebody that doesn't agree with you. You want to practice active listening. Don't just talk at that person. Sit down and have an honest conversation. Tell them your side. Listen to what they're saying and talk. Tell them why you vote for the people that you vote for. Tell stories, get personal. When you listen to Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock, when they give speeches, when they give town halls, when they talk about their policies, what you'll notice is they tell stories. When Barack Obama was talking about Obamacare, he would go up to the mic and he would start talking not about his policy, but about this woman who didn't have access to health care, who had no way to pay for her cancer treatment. He made it personal. He connected that policy to daily life. He made it very personal. And those personal stories connect a lot better than the numbers and the statistics. So feel free to get personal and tell stories. Avoid the word Democrat and focus on policies, because that Democrat word is vilified within the GOP. That person, that Republican, may very well agree with you, but as soon as you say that word Democrat, because that word means something very specific, they're going to stop listening. They're just going to shut down. So stay away from that word. You want to be smart about your resources. So when you've got the perfect article, the perfect poll that completely makes your point in the perfect way, pay attention to where that resource comes from, because there are certain things that a Republican voter is not going to trust. So I've got Occupy Democrats here. If I've got the perfect poll, but it comes from Occupy Democrats, that's not going to make very much of an impact because they're not going to trust that source material. If you can find a more conservative source, I think Wall Street Journal and Washington Times, those are more conservative sources. If I can find an article or a poll from them and it makes my point, not perfectly, but it makes my point, that's a much better resource to send because they're going to pay attention to the information in it. So pay attention to where your resources come from. Put yourself in the shoes of a Republican person and ask yourself, if I got this, would I believe it? Think about that when you're sending resources. And then policy websites of candidates are excellent sources to send people because they are not tailored towards Democrats. They are tailored towards people, especially those statewide candidates like Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock. Their policy website is not talking about let's select Democrats. It's got that policy focused language because they know we got to reach out to Democrats. We got to reach out to Republicans. They are reaching out to voters, not to Democrats. So those policy websites of candidates are excellent resources to send people. And also, I don't know all the intricacies of Stacey Abrams' healthcare policy, but it's all right there on her page or on her website, so I can send that resource. You know what? We're talking about healthcare policy, and I can say, you know what? Stacey Abrams has an excellent plan for that. Let me send you a resource. That way they can read it for themselves. They can get that information for themselves, and I'm not saying something that is inadvertently wrong. So those are great resources. Now, dealing with arguments. When we are talking to Republicans, libertarians, independents, what have you, in this political climate, you are going to probably face an argument. Here's the thing. This is what they told us on the Democratic Party of Georgia texting team. People are going to test you, but you've only got two options. Either you respond with kindness, compassion, and grace, or you leave that conversation and you don't get involved. Because we are representing Abrams, Warnock, Marcus Flowers, Democrats up and down the ballot, all across the nation. We're representing Biden. As a Democrat, I am representing all these people. If I am mean, remember that main GOP strategy is to vilify Democrats. If I go into an argument, if I am mean, if I am hateful, that confirms that GOP misinformation. That confirms, oh, look, Democrats are hateful people. Kathleen's a Democrat. Therefore, what I believe about the Democratic Party is true. We want to avoid that happening. So if you're just thinking, I am about to get into it with this person, I'm angry, I want to shut them down, just don't do it. Think like your grandmother. If you can't say anything nice, just don't say anything at all. Take a step back, leave that conversation because no good is going to come of it. Use that time on a different person who you are likely to change their mind, who you are likely to find common ground, who you are likely to make an impact with. So the response that we would use with people who were being really hateful, who were just cussing us out, who we knew going into it, this is just going to be an argument. The response that we used was, thank you for letting me know, have a nice day. And we left and we moved on to somebody that we could talk to. 9 times out of 10, that response, just by being nice, that person was cussing me out. I say, thank you for letting me know, have a nice day. That person comes back and says, oh, thank you, you as well. And they were polite back to me. We were diffusing that political tension. We were stopping that argument in its footsteps. And we were shutting it down. Sometimes that person would come back and say, hey, you know what? You're nice. I didn't expect this from you. Can I ask you a question? You're getting your foot in the door to have a conversation with that person. But you don't want to get into an argument. You don't want to be angry with a voter. So when you look at a possible conversation, ask yourself, are we going to find common ground? Is this going to be a productive conversation? If not, leave the room. If you think yes, look for the common ground that you both have. Never use combative language, insults, or curses. Do not trash talk GOP candidates as much as you may want to. On the Democratic Party of Georgia texting team, we never even talked about Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue because we didn't need to. The merits of Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff's policy spoke for themselves. And when we're able to let those merits speak for themselves and not tear down another person to talk about our candidate, our message hits a lot stronger because we're representing those people. Let the merits of the candidates speak for themselves. So keep calm and pick your battles. If you just can't be nice, leave the conversation. If you can, look for the common ground and start there. A couple of things not to do. Social media is not friend-to-friend contact. I get a lot of people that come out of these workshops and then they post on social media with voting information, and that's all they do. To be sure, posting voting information to social media is impactful. Like, please do that. Like, post about the early voting dates, post about post about your early voting location finder, post about where you can send in your absentee ballot. Post about the voting information, but recognize that the results, that 95% contact rate, all of that comes from the one-on-one contact of friend-to-friend contact. It comes from being able to tailor your messages. It comes from speaking to a person that you know on a one-on-one basis. When I post voting information, when I post something like, Raphael Warnock has a great healthcare policy to my 500 friends on Facebook, that's going to resonate with a couple of people, but it's probably not going to resonate with very many of them because it's a blanket statement. It's that script problem that we have with phone banking. I say the same thing to every voter. Yes, it's going to resonate with some people. It's not going to resonate with others. The other thing about social media to realize is when I get on Facebook, when I get on Instagram, I am there to scroll mindlessly for 3 hours and get none of my work done. And if I see voting information, because I'm there for this entertainment reason, I'm probably not going to pay attention to it. So that's something to recognize with social media. Yes, you can reach 500 people, but no, very few people are not going to pay attention to it. So when I text my cousin with that same voting information, she's probably going to pay attention. She's probably going to text me back. She's probably going to go out and vote because it's me texting her on a one-on-one basis. Both are good, but friend-to-friend contact is far more powerful. And if you're only going to pick one, you need to pick friend-to-friend contact. When you're reaching out to people, do not try and sound like the Democratic Party of Georgia, the Democratic National Committee. Those political texts and phone calls that we get, you may think, okay, I'm going to reach out to people. I'm going to reach out to my friends with the same language I'm using with voters with the texting team. We don't want to do that because if I text my cousin with the same vocabulary I'm using with the Democratic Party of Georgia texting team, she may mistake my text for a political text from a person that she's never heard of. I want to talk to my cousin like I talk to my cousin in real life so that she doesn't mistake my text for a political text. You want to be yourself. You want to be personal. You don't want to sound like those political organizations, because the beauty of friend-to-friend contact is not sounding like one of those political organizations. So be yourself, be personal. And then last but not least, and most importantly, do not hate on Republicans on the internet or in real life as much as you may want to. Just don't do it. Use compassion, kindness, and grace, because a fire can't burn if you don't give it any fuel. And it is really powerful when we are able to respond to hate with compassion. A fire can't burn if you don't give it any fuel. And if you put water on it, that's even better. Compassion, kindness, and grace, no matter who you're talking to. Do not hate on Republicans. I know it's tempting, but just don't do it. So friend-to-friend contact recap. With hardcore voters, you want to double check that they're voting, because anybody can forget. If they say yes, ask them to reach out to 3 of their friends and let that network extend beyond your reaches. Infrequent voters, give them a nudge, remind them that there's an election, remind them maybe, okay, if somebody cares about women's rights, remind them of a person on the ballot who's running that stands for women's rights. Let them know that information that they're missing that's keeping them from getting to the polls. With non-voters, strategize, be patient, be helpful, remove as many barriers to the ballot box as you can. If that person's never voted, offer to tell them how that process works, because they just don't know until they've done it. Think about a candidate and a policy that is going to get them out to the polls and focus on that. With Republicans, look for the common ground and always start there. Avoid the word Democrat because it's just not helpful. Talk policy and do not get angry. If you start to get angry, remove yourself from that conversation. Thank you for letting me know. Have a nice day, and move on to somebody that you're more willing to make a difference with. You can reach out to everybody, but recognize some people you're just not going to change their minds, and recognize that that's okay. There's somebody there that is just waiting for you to reach out. Leave behind those arguments and move on to those people that you're going to have a great conversation with. Now, step 5 is my most favorite part of the presentation. This is trading anger for hope. We're going to talk about trading walls for bridges, anger as a catalyst, and having capital H hope and what that is. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. All right, so hope. And this is the kind of hope that Barack Obama ran on in 2008. This little hope symbol was one of the campaign, I don't know what you call it. It wasn't a logo, but it was one of, I've got this little pin on my book bag from the 2008 era. So first of all, we want to build bridges, not walls. For the past 30 years, politics has increasingly become about divisions, building up these walls between Democrats and Republicans. We want to tear those walls down and start rebuilding those bridges, like you kind of had in 2008 when you had those Obama house parties, where you were getting a lot of people in a room together. They didn't all necessarily agree with each other, but you were building bridges between those groups that don't typically agree, getting them in a room and talking. So always remember, Republicans are just as outraged as us. A lot of Republicans are, and they see no viable alternative to their GOP because of misinformation campaigns. If we're not reaching out to those people, all they're getting is stuff within their echo chamber and a confirmation that there is no viable alternative. When we reach out to these people, those misinformation campaigns break down very, very quickly, because that main campaign is Democrats are terrible, horrible people. If they believe that, and I reach out to them and I'm nice, I'm not a terrible, horrible person. That misinformation campaign breaks down very, very quickly when all we do is we reach out and we start talking to people. You want to be able to sit down, have a conversation, share your story, and connect and tear down as many walls as you can and start rebuilding these bridges. Now, anger as a catalyst. If you are a Facebook person, you will notice that this is the little anger Facebook react emoji. And the reason, and when you get on social media, Facebook used to just be a thumbs up. Now you've got all of these reactions. You've got love, you've got care, you've got anger. And the reason that I've got this little guy glaring at us is because we get on social media and it is an excellent platform to voice our frustrations, to voice our outrage at all of the terrible things that are going on in America right now. And there is a lot to be outraged about. But it is very important to recognize that that anger, being angry, can be a powerful catalyst for change, but it is not the change. So anger in response to experiencing or witnessing injustice, pain, and struggle. It can be a powerful catalyst for change, but by definition, a catalyst sparks change. It is not the change. Anger feels really powerful, but it only becomes powerful when we transform it into something life-giving. Courage, love, change, compassion, justice. That anger is not powerful until we turn it into votes. One person at one of these workshops posted in the comments, you want to take the energy of that anger and turn it into votes. And that's what we want to think about. Because a lot of people I reached out to in 2020, 2021, I'm still reaching out to some people and they're angry, but they're not willing to get up and do the work. And a lot of times I'll hear things like, well, Kathleen, I'm not a leader. John Lewis, Barack Obama, those people are leaders. They're making the change. I'm not like them. I can't do that, so I'm going to stay home. Or, you know what, somebody's going to make that change, but it's not going to be me, so I'm not going to go out. Anger is what happens when we want change, but we're stuck wanting and not quite ready to go out and get it. And I tell you this because I was stuck in 2020. Those quotes at the bottom of this slide are mine. I said those things. From 2008, I was training phone bankers for the Obama campaign that were phone banking for the Obama campaign. 2020, I was working for the Democratic Party of Georgia, but for the 12 years in between, I did not do any election work at all. I posted about how angry I was and how outraged I was on social media about the GOP policy and about where America was headed. And that made me feel powerful. That anger made me feel powerful. And I told other people how to do election work, but I couldn't make myself do it myself because I live in one of the reddest districts in the country. I lived in a red county, in a red district, in what was then a red state, in the middle of the deep South, and my uterus is more regulated than an assault rifle. And how, when you feel that hopeless, can you get up and have the courage to do this work? Because it is hard to do this when you don't believe that what you're trying to do is possible. When you don't have capital H hope. So if you take anything from this workshop, I want you to take this. This capital H hope is how we get unstuck from the anger and turn it into something useful, turn it into votes, from a catalyst for change into the change. So what is capital H hope? This is what Barack Obama ran on in 2008, that famous hope, Shepard Fairey hope poster that's hanging in the Smithsonian. That kind of hope. When you start reading civil rights and voting rights leaders, their speeches, their books, their memoirs, the word hope appears over and over and over again. And it is not a passive form of hope. It's very active. It's not, I hope tomorrow goes better. When John Lewis described hope, he said, when you hold on to hope, you hold on to something so powerful, it almost wills it to happen. Hope also puts your mind at ease because it is like putting your faith in a higher power. There is a sanctity to this word when these leaders use it. And the best definition that I could find, best honest to God definition, was hope is a combination of setting goals, having the tenacity and perseverance to pursue them, and believing in our own abilities. The belief in our own abilities is what I was missing from 2008 all the way to 2020, because this doesn't work if we don't believe what we're trying to do is possible. And it doesn't become possible until all of us who keep waiting for that change to come stand up and demand it. I waited for 12 years, very angry that change wasn't happening and upset at how backwards our country was, how far away we were moving from all that progress we made in 2008. And it took until July of 2020 to realize that when you wait, you're going to be waiting forever. July of 2020 is when John Lewis died, and this is a mural that's in Atlanta. If you're ever in the area, it's a great one to go see. But 2020, July of 2020, John Lewis died. And John Lewis, to me, was a superhero of American politics. He's a person who had his skull cracked open marching for the right to vote. And rather than taking that as a sign that, maybe I should take a step back from this, he kept marching. For 60 miles from Selma to Montgomery, he marched with a cracked skull and bloody bandages around his head. And at 23 years old, he spoke at the March on Washington in 63. He spoke before Martin Luther King Jr. This guy was built different. This is a superhero to me. This is who this person was. And when he died, I was thinking, and probably a lot of people were thinking, how can we possibly make change? How can we possibly move forward without John Lewis to lead us, without our superheroes to lead us? So I'm watching the funeral, and Barack Obama gets up and he gives a eulogy for John Lewis. And I was really, really confused because he wasn't giving the eulogy of a superhero. Barack Obama was talking about this very ordinary, very short person. And I always tell people I'm 4'8". So being told that John Lewis was really short made an impact on me. But Barack Obama is reminding me that this is not the comic books. We don't have superheroes in America. We just have people. And so then Obama says, what a revolutionary notion. This idea that any of us ordinary people, even a young kid from Troy, Alabama, can stand up to the powers and the principalities and say, no, this isn't right. This isn't true. This isn't just. He said America was built by John Lewis's. He meant America was built by ordinary people. Flipping Georgia did not happen until all of us who wanted that future stopped posting on social media and being angry, and we stood up and we made it happen. A bunch of nobodies who were tired of waiting, just like me, that's who did the impossible and flipped this state, not once, but 3 times. So this is what 2020 taught me. This is why I make these workshops. This is what I want everybody that's here to realize. In America, our leaders don't make the change, the people they lead do. Because when you look at this picture, and John Lewis and Hosea Williams right at the front, realize that if you take away all those people marching behind them, all those faces that we may not recognize, when you take away all those people, John Lewis and Hosea Williams are just 2 men on a bridge. And you can't make change that way. So if you've been to these workshops in the past, you will have heard me say this, but I'm going to continue to say it. The ordinary people in these workshops are the superheroes that you keep waiting for. So stay angry. By all means, stay angry that change hasn't come. But I want you to be able to use that anger and turn it into courage, into love, into change, compassion, and justice, and make it happen. Turn that anger into the votes that's going to create the change to fix what we are all so outraged about. That's what capital H hope is. The belief in yourself and the ability to get up and use your personal power as an individual, and recognizing it's not just the leaders. All of us can be a leader like that if we can believe in our own abilities. So a recap, 5 steps to flipping North Georgia. We need a new mindset, because when we look at these conservative areas and see a lost cause, we've got to recognize we're not looking at the right charts. It is entirely possible to flip these areas, but we have to change our mindset when we look at them. We need to shift our language, move away from political language, that exclusionary language, and talk policy, and bring all those people into the room so everybody can understand that conversation. We need to change our strategy. We can't just reach out to Democrats. We can't just turn out every single Democrat in an area. We've got to reach out to those discontented Republicans, to the non-voters, to the infrequent voters. We've got to map out our networks and recognize all the people that we have the ability to reach out to, and recognize it's not just turning out strong Democrats. It's about turning out those non-voters. It's about turning out those discontented Republicans and recognizing it's possible to do that. And then we need to trade our anger for capital H hope and recognize we have the ability to create this change. We've just got to use it and believe in it. So I end every workshop with this quote from Barack Obama, because I think it sums up everything pretty perfectly. One voice can change a room. And if one voice can change a room, then it can change a city. If it can change a city, it can change a state. If it can change a state, it can change a nation. If it can change a nation, your voice can change the world. We did that in 2008. We did that in 2020. We did that in 2021, and we can absolutely do it in 2022. But it takes the belief in ourselves and the belief that our voice is as powerful as it can be. Your voice has the same power as John Lewis. You've just got to use it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And this is the point where you can ask any questions that you may have, policy questions, voting questions, where to find information, where to find resources. Please ask those questions. You can unmute or you can post in the chat. If I can't answer, I will find you an answer, or comments, concerns, what have you.
I have a question, Kathleen. How can I track my vote if I do have to mail it in?
It varies depending on the state. I used to know, let's see, I used to know the website by heart.
Is it vote.org?
There's a couple of different ways to do it. I think you may be able to do it at iwillvote.com. Vote.org is probably another one. There is, for Georgia, we had a track your ballot website that I can try and look back up and send you. I think it was nationwide. I think it could tell which state you were in. And when we were in Georgia, it tracked your Georgia ballot, but I think it's a nationwide website. So I'll look that up.
I just actually, while you were just answering, vote.com is nationwide, so it looked pretty easy.
Okay.
But,
and they have a track your ballot option?
Yeah, right
Okay.
there. Vote.com. Yeah, for every state, yeah.
Okay, so vote.org is a good one. And to bring that up, if you are voting by absentee, absolutely track your ballot, make sure that gets counted. If something is wrong with that ballot, you have a certain amount of days to fix it. It's called curing your ballot. So if you send in an absentee ballot, make sure that it gets counted, make sure there's nothing wrong with it. If there's something wrong, you can immediately start fixing it. So that's a great resource to have in your toolbox.
Can I bring my children?
Yeah, of course. My mom brought me and my brother when we used to go, when she voted, when we were children, and they would give us the little I voted stickers because we were kids and we liked stickers. So absolutely. It's also great to give kids, like one of my friends that I was talking about who didn't know the voting process. If she had gone with her parents, she would have known that process and would have been more familiar with it. And so when those people end up able to vote themselves, it's a lot easier if you've been there before with your parents. So that's great if you take your kids.
Yeah, I'm bringing a friend, and so yeah, I think it's pretty important that we bring children and stuff. So
Nice.
that's
We had a lot of
brought me to vote all the time. That's the reason I knew how the system worked. And I always took Kathleen and Benjamin with me and showed them, in the booth with me, just like mom and daddy took me in when we pulled the curtain, and, then we had to pull the lever down, and the old timey machines where they were actually punching the ballot when you're pulling the lever. So I always knew how the system worked. And when Kathleen had that one young woman who hadn't voted because she didn't know how it worked, I knew immediately her parents never took her with them. And some people can't, I understand that. But if you have the ability to take a child with you, it's so important to do that, because that's training the next generation of voters.
Yeah.
It's also in 2020, we had a lot of people. One of the things that we asked all of our volunteers to do was, when you go out and vote, take a picture of you with your voter sticker, post that. Because when we post voting information on social media, Facebook, Instagram, what have you, if it is text, the way that our brains work nowadays, if it's text, I may scroll past it and never see it. But if it is a picture of one of my friends that I'm on Facebook to, stay in contact with, I see that person, I see their face, and I see that sticker. That's a lot more eye-catching. So that's something that's very good to do. And we had a lot of our volunteers take their kids, the whole family. Somebody took her husband, and their 6 children. None of the kids could vote. One of them could. One of them had just turned 18. But they took all those kids and they took a picture of both of them, their child that could vote for the first time, and all those other children. And they were all so excited to be there. And introducing that voting process and making it exciting early on also helps when you get to be, a jaded 20-year-old, recognizing I've been here before, but also this is a cool thing that, oh, now I can finally do this thing that I've been watching my parents do. So that's something else. But posting a picture of yourself when you vote is a really good form of voter outreach for Facebook and Instagram. It's kind of taking social media and using it to your best advantage with that voting information. So Susanna said, internet is not available everywhere in North Georgia. It is not. In Murray County, Georgia, my dad practices medicine. And when the pandemic started, he had a lot of telehealth. And a lot of his patients could not do that from home. They had to drive to the parking lot of his office and hook up to the office internet because they didn't have internet access at home. A lot of kids, when they started doing online schooling during the pandemic, a lot of kids fell behind because they did not have internet access. They did not have the ability to do schooling at home. Our Taekwondo school set up kind of a, not after school program, but a school program. They set up an empty studio with dividers. They got all the kids masked, and they allowed kids to bring a laptop, bring whatever they had, and hook up to the Taekwondo studio's internet and do their schooling there, because a lot of the kids in this area do not have internet at home. So that's a big problem for this area.
We're in a very unique area because we have a lot of industry. We have the carpet industry and all the supporting industries that go along with it. And we have an amazing utility company. It's called Dalton Utilities. And we have the industry that we have because Dalton Utilities has enabled it to grow. And so I call it an umbrella, a utility umbrella, where we have really great services locally where we are. But outside of that umbrella, the services are not good. And I know my husband is a physician, and for years he had a practice in Murray County on his own. And they struggled with the internet in that practice, because now you can't just practice with paper charts. You have to have, online medical records, all that kind of stuff. You have to have internet access to practice. And it was constant. We were struggling with the internet connection. It would just drop all the time. And Hamilton Medical Center, which is the big hospital here locally, was building a building, and they would not build their building in Murray County until Dalton Utilities extended a line out to that building. That was the first line Dalton Utilities, built out to Murray County. But that's the kind of situations that we have. I mean, it's a constant battle to get utilities outside of our umbrella area.
Some people also can't pay for it. They don't have access because they can't pay for it. But a lot of people, if they can pay, they don't have the option in that area. So Susanna asks, so important issues, healthcare, internet access. Tom and my mom spitball with me to think about other good issues for this area. Immigration is a big one. Dalton has a very, very large immigrant population.
That's a hot issue.
That's a hot issue up here.
That's like an abortion issue. You don't want to get in, you don't want to touch
Yes,
that.
but how are you handling it? Because it does come up. We have it
So
in Arizona.
the best thing that I might say for that is to send them like the policy page for Raphael Warnock. He has a good immigration policy. Send Stacey Abrams' policy website, because whatever I say, it's very difficult for me to say something and not it turn into an argument. those policy answers from Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock have been perfectly crafted by
Yes.
some of the best data teams in the country to come up with language that appeals to a large group of people. So rather than me trying to walk on eggshells on that issue, I am going to send the professional language from Stacey Abrams, Raphael Warnock, what have you. Usually when you're talking about immigration policy, you're talking about more statewide candidates because they're the ones that have more impact on that stuff. But definitely try and send the candidate website. If you want to copy and paste the wording, you can, but to actually send that policy page, that's what I would do.
That makes sense. Yeah.
During 2020, it was really great because Biden, when you have a presidential candidate running, they have the most in-depth policy website of anybody in the United States, and it had everything. It had all of the language you could possibly want. And a lot of times when I didn't have something specific that I wanted to be able to answer for Warnock or for Ossoff, I drew from the Biden policy website because that is Democratic platform. And if I didn't have something specific from Warnock, I could send that party platform information. In 2024, the whoever ends up being the presidential candidate, that website is going to be a treasure trove of language. We don't really have that right now because Biden is the president and he doesn't have as much of that policy website. But the statewide candidates have pretty good information on their websites.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
We have to really be careful of the immigration because at this point, like in Dalton and Whitfield County, migrants or Latinos were brought in to work in our mills, and they have quickly become our community is a very dynamic community because of the fact that they have been brought in. It's changing very rapidly, and our local community college has gotten a huge grant because of the fact that, Kathleen, what is it? We've got such a huge base of young Latino students.
We've got a large immigrant population. I started at Dalton State College, which is our local community college, and it's one of the most affordable colleges in the country. So a lot of the immigrants in this area, their kids are able to go to Dalton State and get a college education. And so in 2013, my brother and I started at Dalton State. 71%, I think, of our graduating class were first generation college students. So that kind of gives you an idea of the makeup in this area.
It started out like where they were attacking the population, but as the population has aged on out and you're into the second and third generations, there's more acceptance. And I think now there's more of a courting of the population because they see them as they see them as voters. And it's fascinating to me to see how the Republicans are reaching out to them and how kind of the topics that they're reaching out to them on, like communism, socialism.
So one thing that I will mention for reaching out to immigrant populations, one thing that we always get hit with during election cycle years, especially midterms and presidential elections, from a lot of the immigrant groups, they'll say, you only reach out to us during election season.
Right.
You only care about us during this one time. And so one thing that the Democratic Party of Georgia started to do after 2020, because we got that from a lot of people, was they set up somebody that was in charge of Latinx outreach in North Georgia, somebody in charge of Latinx outreach just in Atlanta. And they set that up to have contact with these communities, not just during election season, because we do care about these communities, but we only end up reaching out during voting season. So one thing that needs to change, and I don't know how well each of us can do this on a personal basis, but to reach out to groups. And the Whitfield County Democratic Committee has been trying to do this, to go and show up at Latinx events in town, to work with the Latinx community all the time so that they know we don't just want your votes, we actually care. And it also comes down to that issue of voters want leaders that care about them. We want to show that we care about these communities. We want to show that our candidates care about these communities. And that doesn't just mean voter outreach. It means contact. It means talking to these people. It means having conversations and showing, I'm not just here for your vote. I want to make sure that you can vote. I want to make sure that you have that power. Not just now, but all the time. I want you to be able to go out and vote for internet access. I want you to be able to go out and vote for your health care. Making it a policy thing, not, hey, can you vote for Democrats, makes a difference with these groups. So that's another thing to think about. I've got a person, a friend who's texted me on Instagram, and he said this is going to be his first time voting, and he's really, really excited. And he's within that immigrant population.
And
But it's the policy that he cares about. He's a policy-driven person. He does not understand the Democrat-Republican. He doesn't care about Democrat and Republican, but those policies got him really excited to go out and vote for the first time.
Okay.
we
So I-
live, we live really close to the highway, to a big intersection in the old part of town. And I can't count the number of times I've seen in the off years, Stacey Abrams' big fair fight bus. And it's been coming out of the Latino sections of town, where she's been down in those sections. And she's,
Yeah, and that's something that Fair Fight did, and that's something that Stacey Abrams did. 95% of eligible voters in Georgia are registered to vote, and a lot of that came from not reaching out during election season, but during all of that time in between. As soon as Stacey Abrams lost the election in 2018, a lot of work. Fair Fight was founded in 2014. But after 2018, they got to work and started registering all of the people within those immigrant communities, within the Black community, within the Latinx community, within what have you. And come election time, we didn't have to put our efforts into registering everybody. We could just hit the ground running with turning out voters. So that outreach between elections is really, really important.
Thank you so much for answering my questions.
No problem. How do I get connected with a phone bank for Georgia? So mobilize.us, I'm going to post it in the chat, is going to be the center for all of the voting opportunities you can possibly want. Let's see. I think Mobilize will bring up voting opportunity or voter outreach opportunities for whatever state it recognizes that you're in. But you can also, and I'll send out this, the Georgia Democrat page for Mobilize has all of the voter outreach opportunities for Georgia. So we had a lot of people, a lot of our staff for the Democratic Party of Georgia in 2020 were from California. We had a lot of volunteer leaders from New York. There was somebody from Texas. We had somebody from Massachusetts, Arizona, from all over, and they were getting that stuff from Mobilize. We had a big phone banking group in Oregon. Actually, they were one of our most hardcore groups that phone banked every week. They got those opportunities from Mobilize.
Right. Well, it's no secret that I am from Massachusetts, but I have a lot of friends in Georgia. So it's so important that I know this too. So
yeah.
Perfect.
And then Susanna says she's from New York City. And yes, you're inspired by what happened in the runoffs. We had a lot of people in 2020, after Georgia was not on the map. No, we weren't even looked at as a contender. People were more focused on Texas as a flip that might flip in 2020. And then Georgia became the center of the political universe. We had volunteers from all 49 other states working in Georgia in the runoffs. There were 10,000 people just in our little phone banking group on our Slack channel. It was crazy. And we had so many people wanting to text bank that we had to just shut that down because it got so chaotic. And we just started moving everybody to friend contact. But we had everybody. I had a guy text us. He was from, I want to say New Mexico. And he said, I'm getting a plane ticket to be a line warmer in Georgia for the runoffs. And he flew over here and he was a line warmer. And it was crazy.
Well, it was beautiful to watch. It
Oh,
was
yeah. It was
beautiful to
amazing.
watch. The
From
electricity.
and two, people ask me what it's like to work in politics in Georgia. It's kind of awesome because we went from a state that just didn't matter to the literal center of the political universe. And that's just, it's crazy to watch.
I
And
learned
it can
a lot.
happen in all of the states. But it takes, one of the reasons that Georgia flipped is there was so much work to fight voter suppression with Fair Fight with Stacey Abrams. She says Georgia was just blue and confused. There's a lot of states like that, but you have voter suppression laws. You have a lot of people that don't understand the connection between the vote and daily life, which is something that Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight made sure to explain to people. When you have voter education, when you have voter outreach, when you have lawyers and these legal teams and volunteers fighting voter suppression, all of these states that we think of as red turned blue very quickly because these policies are more helpful to more people. They positively benefit more people. Voters just don't know that. So this kind of stuff that we're talking about tonight, it works everywhere. And what happened in Georgia can happen anywhere, but it does take the work. It takes, you know, all that stuff.
I got very busy, so yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
work in 2020. So
A
that
lot of
changed
work.
me, so. And I learned in 2022 that when I'm talking or arguing, I don't have to argue. I don't have to have that last word. And you know what, it's given me peace of mind. So
Yeah.
simply state the fact. And if it doesn't work, then, move on.
There you go. You let the merits speak for themselves. And if it doesn't work, you just move on to somebody that's more willing to listen. So I know that this has gone on
Yeah.
super late, but we had a great conversation. We had a great discussion afterward, and these were great questions. I am going to send out a follow-up email with I was going to say, I've done like 15 of these workshops, and usually I say I'm going to send out the link so that you can send these workshops to more people. This was the last workshop, but we did record this. I'm going to get that uploaded to YouTube, and then I'm going to send that out so you can send it to the people around you if you would like them to watch this, pop some popcorn, watch a workshop. I'm also going to send out a link to join our Slack channel. I think most of the people here know what Slack is, but if you've never used it, it's just what politics uses to keep volunteers organized and connected during election season. It's where I'm going to be posting probably on a daily basis, something that you can reach out to voters with that day. So like last Saturday, it was one of the 2 Saturdays of statewide early voting that we have in Georgia. So the message for that last Saturday was, hey, make sure and reach out to 3 people and remind them that early voting is happening this Saturday. And so it's kind of messaging suggestions as we go through GOTV week and get up to election day and what have you. So I'm going to send the link to join our Slack. Please do join. We've got some cool people there. And Jenny, that's a part of the Notorious Nasty Women, is posting resources that are really cool. Yeah, use friend-to-friend contact. Reach out to your friends. Never write off anybody just because you're sure that they voted. Never write off anybody just because they may have voted for Trump. They may not believe that stuff anymore. They may be looking for a viable alternative. And
I have
hope that-
hope. I have
yeah.
hope.
And keep the hope, have capital H hope, believe in your own abilities, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Night.
Bye.
Thanks, Tom. Night.
Good night.